La STM vous souhaite la bienvenue à bord.
Doing his best to get you there on time. This is In Transit on the Elias Makos Show. CJAT 800.
So In Transit gets away from the bus and the metro and cars and everything on the planet. We head to space for In Transit today to get an update on Starliner. Now, it was on June 5th that NASA and Boeing made headlines when they launched their exciting Starliner spacecraft. It was meant to be an 8-day trip to certify the ship for future missions. And it has now turned into more than 8 weeks as the Starliner finds itself stuck in space, stuck at the International Space Station. 2 astronauts, Butch Wilmore, Suni Williams, stranded aboard the ISS. NASA set to hold high-level flight readiness reviews, trying to get some answers. They've provided some answers to the media, but not all of them. Let's find out the latest from Eric Berger, Senior Space Editor at Ars Technica. Eric, thanks for coming back onto the show.
My pleasure.
So,
Good morning.
Listen. What is the latest? What has NASA told you about what is going to happen with Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams and them being stranded on the space station?
Well, publicly, NASA said they're still studying data and additional analysis of tests performed on the faulty thrusters of Starliner to try to understand the root cause of the problem. They're holding program-level meetings this week, and then they're going to get together possibly Friday for something called a flight readiness review, where there will be a formal go or no-go poll of the different, groups involved, such as the crew office, engineering, flight directors, those sorts of entities.
Is there any chance that those astronauts will, at this point, will return on the Starliner?
Yes, there's still a chance. I'm told that both they return on Starliner as well as the return on a rescue mission via Crew Dragon are being worked at Johnson Space Center in Houston. However, most likely they will return on Crew Dragon.
Let's talk about the calculations that are made here, because in space, everything is risky, right? If you leave them up there, right, waiting for a rescue mission, there's risk to that, and there's risk, of course, to putting them back on Starliner when you have all of these issues with the craft. What do you think is the determining factor here? Whether it comes to rescue mission later, Starliner sooner, what do you think is going through the minds of those at NASA to make that decision?
You make a great point. There are risks in all different scenarios at this point. Butch and Suni, if they remain on orbit for 8 months, their lifetime radiation risk is higher, right, because they're above Earth's atmosphere. If you launch Crew Dragon with 2 people, so that Butch and Suni can come back on Dragon, there is a slight risk that that there will be problems during this flight to the space station where those astronauts would need 4 crew members to handle those situations. So NASA is trying to balance all of those risks. At the end of the day, they tell me, and I feel pretty confident the final determination will be made on crew safety. And so if at the end of the day, the engineers at NASA decide, look, we don't fundamentally understand what's causing these thruster problems, we don't feel comfortable putting Butch and Suni on Starliner, that's the decision they'll make.
Do you think they've waited this long to make a final decision because there are so many hopes on Starliner, on Boeing Starliner, on that program? Is that what is causing the delay to a final decision?
No, they needed a month to update the software configuration on Starliner because it was not capable of undocking without crew on board in the current configuration. And so that work has been proceeding behind the scenes to leave that option open. And so that's why they've kind of pushed the decision out. And that's also, beneficially, for NASA, giving them time to analyze the problem and look at that data just to make sure that everyone's on board with the decision.
If it turns out to be rescue mission with, SpaceX, the Dragon, you called it, right? That's the vessel they would use?
Crew Dragon, yep.
Crew Dragon, right? So if it turns into rescue mission, how many days will those astronauts end up being in space?
Butch and Suni will have been on orbit for 8 months, something on the order of 240 days. Schedules always get moved around a little bit. So, yeah, it's quite a difference from 8 days.
So this leads me to the question I wanted to get to, right? So I'm just trying to think mentally here. right? If you were set for an 8-day mission, and now you're told, oh, sorry, it's 240 days. Are there any worries? I mean, you probably know the training and that kind of stuff. I would imagine that mentally, that's got to affect an astronaut if they're told, oh, sorry, you're now there for 8 months instead of 8 days. Can you add anything on that front?
Mentally it is difficult. I've talked to a lot of astronauts on and off the record about this kind of situation, and look, they're professionals. They knew that this was a test flight. They knew that however small, that this was a potential outcome of their situation. So I don't think mentally they were prepared for it. I know that Sonny Williams probably is very happy to remain on orbit for 8 months. Butch Wilmore has been more of a test pilot, so he may not want to spend that long in space. But this may not be ideal, but they're professionals and they'll handle it.
We're with Eric Berger, senior space editor at Ars Technica, getting an update on the Starliner spacecraft, which is stuck at the International Space Station. Eric, the people that are in charge of this mission, do they have experience with previous NASA disasters? In my mind, I'm thinking Challenger in Columbia and that kind of stuff, because people end up being NASA lifers, right, and working on all these missions. Do you think that that could be at play here, right? People that have gone through the worst case scenarios and how they have to make now decisions and trying to keep crew safety at the forefront.
That's absolutely a great point. The key decision makers here all are veterans of Columbia, which was the loss of the space shuttle in 2003, the death of seven astronauts. NASA's head of commercial crew was a flight controller during that mission. Ken Bowersox, who's kind of the head of the agency over this particular area of human spaceflight, was on the International Space Station, and he came back on a Soyuz spacecraft after that accident. Key figures at Boeing were involved in that reentry, and so yes, I think this weighs heavily on a lot of people at NASA, Boeing, and in Houston who lived through this awful tragedy 21 years ago.
Let me throw you this scenario at you. Let's say the decision's made, we're going back on Starliner, a software update works, crew gets back on, and everything goes well. It's the best case scenario. Everyone's back. The Starliner actually performed better than the projections. Everything works out. What does it mean for the future of Starliner? Because can the Starliner program recover, even if the astronauts get back, in the best case scenario on Starliner?
Yeah, I think it does. It's going to take some time. NASA, I think, is pretty embarrassed because they, when this vehicle flew 2 years ago without people on board in a test flight, some of these similar thruster issues occurred, and 2 years later, they let that vehicle go to space with astronauts on board. And so there is going to be a very meticulous and careful analysis of all of this to really understand the root cause of the problem. But I do think astronauts eventually would fly to the space station, especially if Starliner comes back with Butch and Sonny on board.
And on the private enterprise competition front and SpaceX, does this turn into something that SpaceX can use to their advantage, to get future contracts? Are they already doing this? Are there any murmurs behind the scene? Because it certainly seems like SpaceX has been able to do some incredible stuff. I
don't think SpaceX has to actively try to leverage this for any benefit. NASA already knows it. A decade ago, Boeing was their most reliable contractor, and now today, SpaceX is the one who's delivering. I mean, SpaceX put crew back into space in 2020 with Crew Dragon, and they're doing it every time NASA needs something from SpaceX. They've stepped up and delivered. So this is just another example of how the roles have really reversed, and SpaceX has become the reliable contractor. I know it may seem odd to your listeners, given the behavior of the founder of SpaceX, Elon Musk, but in reality, NASA recognizes them as by far their most reliable contractor in the company that has delivered for them over and over again over the last 10 years.
Eric, excellent coverage over at Ars Technica for our listeners if they want to find out some more about Starliner and the space missions that are happening right now. Thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure. Take care.